Good evening, and welcome back to another journey through ancient history. Tonight, we're exploring one of the most fascinating mythologies from the cradle of civilization, the story of the Anunnaki. These mysterious beings from ancient Mesopotamian beliefs have captivated minds for thousands of years. In this video, you'll understand everything about who the Anunnaki were, their role in creation myths, and how their stories shaped ancient civilizations. Make sure to stay until the end as we uncover every detail of this remarkable mythology. Now close your eyes, get comfortable, and enjoy the story. Let's begin. The land between two rivers. Our story begins over 5,000 years ago in the fertile lands of ancient Mesopotamia, the region between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, in what is now modern-day Iraq. This was a place where humanity first learned to write, build cities, and record their beliefs about the cosmos and the divine. The Sumerians, one of the earliest civilizations in human history, developed a complex understanding of the universe. They looked up at the night sky and saw not just stars, but a realm of powerful beings who controlled every aspect of existence. Among these divine entities were the Anunnaki, a group of deities whose name would echo through millennia. The word Anunnaki itself comes from the Sumerian language. It can be broken down into components that roughly translate to those who came from heaven to earth, or offspring of Anu. Anu was the supreme sky god, the father of gods, who ruled from the highest heavens. The Anunnaki were his divine children and grandchildren, beings of immense power who played crucial roles in the cosmic order. The Sumerians believed that before humans walked the earth, before cities rose from the plains, the Anunnaki had already established their presence in Mesopotamia. These gods were not distant, abstract forces. They were intimately involved in the world, residing in temples, requiring worship, and directly influencing the fate of humanity. The divine hierarchy. To understand the Anunnaki, we must first understand the structure of the Mesopotamian pantheon. The universe, as the ancient Sumerians conceived it, was organized into three realms: the heavens, the earth, and the underworld. Each realm had its rulers, and the Anunnaki were distributed across these cosmic domains. At the very top of this hierarchy stood Anu, the sky god, whose name literally meant heaven. Anu resided in the highest heaven, a place so distant and elevated that he rarely intervened directly in earthly or even divine affairs. He was the source of all authority, the ultimate sovereign whose word was law, even among gods. Below Anu came his sons, each ruling their designated sphere. Enlil, whose name meant Lord Wind or Lord Storm, became the king of the gods on earth. He was given dominion over the atmosphere and the earth's surface. Enlil was not just powerful, he was often portrayed as stern, sometimes even wrathful. His decisions shaped the fate of both gods and mortals. His temple in the city of Nippur became the religious center of Sumerian civilization. Enki, also called Ea in later Babylonian texts, was another son of Anu. Enki was the god of fresh water, wisdom, magic, and crafts. He ruled over the Abzu, the primordial waters beneath the earth from which all life flowed. Unlike the stern Enlil, Enki was known for his cleverness, his benevolence toward humanity, and his love of creative solutions to problems. He was the divine craftsman, the keeper of secret knowledge. The third major realm, the underworld, or Kur, was ruled by Ereshkigal, the goddess of death and the land of no return. This dark realm was where the souls of the dead traveled, and even gods feared its power. These primary deities had children and associates, creating an extensive family tree of divine beings, all part of the Anunnaki. There were 7 who judged fate, 50 great gods, and hundreds of lesser deities, each with specific responsibilities ranging from agriculture and beer brewing to writing and warfare. The Anunnaki were not all equal. Some were great gods, the Igigi, who lived in heaven and rarely descended to earth. Others were working gods assigned to maintain the cosmic order. This hierarchy was not just about power. It reflected the Sumerian understanding of how society itself should function, with clear ranks, responsibilities, and divine authority flowing from top to bottom. The creation of humanity, one of the most important myths involving the Anunnaki, concerns the very creation of humanity. This story appears in various forms across Mesopotamian literature, but the core narrative remains consistent and reveals much about how the ancient Sumerians viewed their place in the cosmos. In the beginning, according to these myths, the Anunnaki gods had to perform all the labor necessary to maintain the world. They dug irrigation canals, cultivated fields, and maintained the boundaries between fresh water and salt water. For thousands of years, the lesser Anunnaki, sometimes called the Igigi, toiled endlessly while the great gods resided in comfort. Eventually, the burden became too great. The working gods grew exhausted and resentful. In some versions of the myth, they went on strike, refusing to continue their backbreaking labor. They surrounded Enlil's house, threatening rebellion. The situation reached a crisis point that threatened the stability of the divine order itself. The great gods convened a council to address this unprecedented situation. Enlil was angry at the rebellion, but even he recognized that something had to change. It was Enki, the wise god of wisdom and crafts, who proposed an elegant solution: create a new being, a substitute worker who could take over the labor that was wearing down the Anunnaki. This new being would be called Lulu, humanity. But creating humanity required something special. Enki proposed mixing clay from the Abzu, the primordial waters, with the blood of a slain god. In one version of the myth recorded in the Atrahasis epic, a god named We'ila, described as having personality or spirit, was sacrificed. His blood, mixed with clay, would give humanity both a physical form and a divine spark, enough intelligence and capability to perform complex tasks, but not enough power to threaten the gods. The goddess Nintu, also called Ninhursag or Mami, who was the mother goddess and deity of birth, shaped this mixture into the first humans. Some texts describe her mixing the divine blood with clay on brick molds, creating 7 males and 7 females. Other accounts give different numbers, but the essential concept remained. Humanity was deliberately crafted by the Anunnaki to serve as their workforce. This creation story is striking in its honesty about the relationship between gods and humans. Humanity was not created out of love or companionship, but out of necessity, to relieve the gods of labor. However, the story also gave humans a special status. They carried within them the blood of a god, making them more than mere animals. This divine component explained human intelligence, creativity, and capacity for civilization. The Anunnaki taught these first humans everything they needed to survive and serve. They instructed them in agriculture, showing them how to plow fields and harvest grain. They taught them irrigation, enabling civilization to flourish in an otherwise harsh environment. They introduced the arts of civilization: writing, mathematics, architecture, metalworking, and more. In return, humans were expected to maintain the temples, provide offerings of food and drink, and worship the gods. This relationship was understood as a kind of contract. The gods provided order, protection, and knowledge, while humans provided service and sustenance through their offerings. The Great Flood, perhaps no story involving the Anunnaki, has captured the imagination more thoroughly than the myth of the Great Flood. This narrative appears in several Mesopotamian texts, most notably the Epic of Gilgamesh and the Atrahasis epic, and bears striking similarities to flood myths found in other cultures, including the biblical account of Noah's Ark. According to the Mesopotamian version, after humanity had been created and had multiplied across the earth, a problem arose. Humans became too numerous and too noisy. Their constant activity, their celebrations, their quarrels, and their very existence created a din that disturbed the gods, particularly Enlil, who required peace for his rest. Enlil, known for his stern temperament, grew increasingly annoyed. The texts describe how the noise of mankind became intolerable to him. He brought his complaint before the Council of the Anunnaki, proposing increasingly severe solutions. First, he sent plague to reduce human population. When humanity recovered, he sent drought and famine. Each time, humans survived and multiplied once again. But there was a problem with these attempts. Enki, the god of wisdom and friend to humanity, kept warning his favorite human, a wise and righteous man named Atrahasis, in the Atrahasis epic, or Utnapishtim in the Epic of Gilgamesh, about each coming disaster, allowing preparations to be made. Frustrated by these failures, Enlil proposed a final, absolute solution, a devastating flood that would wipe out all of humanity in one overwhelming catastrophe. This time, he made the other Anunnaki swear an oath not to warn humanity about what was coming. The great gods agreed to Enlil's plan, though not all were comfortable with this wholesale destruction. Enki, bound by his oath to the Anunnaki Council, could not directly warn his human friend. But the clever god found a loophole. Instead of speaking to Atrahasis directly, Enki addressed a reed wall, seemingly talking to himself. He described in great detail the coming flood and the need to build a great boat, specifications, dimensions, how to seal it with pitch, what to bring aboard. Atrahasis, who happened to be on the other side of that reed wall, overheard everything. Following Enki's instructions given to the wall, Atrahasis built a massive boat and loaded it with his family, craftsmen to preserve knowledge, and breeding pairs of animals. When the appointed time arrived, the Anunnaki themselves unleashed the flood. The storm god Adad thundered in the clouds, while Nergal pulled up the dams of the underground waters. Ninurta, god of war and hunting, made the dikes overflow. The Anunnaki, in their fury and power, held up torches that lit the land with their terrible flames. The flood that followed was catastrophic beyond measure. Water covered everything, rising above even the highest mountains. The storm raged for 7 days and 7 nights. The description in these ancient texts is visceral and terrible. Even the gods were frightened by what they had unleashed. The Anunnaki cowered like dogs, crouching against the walls of heaven. The goddess Ishtar cried out, lamenting that she had agreed to this destruction. She wept for humanity, her voice compared to that of a woman in childbirth. When the waters finally began to recede and the boat came to rest on a mountain, Atrahasis emerged and immediately offered sacrifice to the gods. The texts describe how the starving Anunnaki, who had received no offerings during humanity's destruction, gathered like flies around the sacrifice. They suddenly realized what they had lost. Without humans to tend temples and provide offerings, the gods themselves suffered. Enlil arrived and was initially furious to discover that humans had survived. But Enki defended his actions, arguing eloquently that complete destruction was neither just nor wise. Humans committed sins, yes, but should not all of humanity be punished for the faults of some? Instead of flood, send specific punishments for specific crimes. Let there be some who die childless, some whose children do not survive, natural limits on population, but do not destroy all of creation. The other Anunnaki, sobered by their experience of the flood and its aftermath, agreed. A compromise was reached. Humanity would be allowed to continue, but with new limitations. Human lifespan would be reduced. Not everyone would successfully bear children. There would be natural checks on population growth. In return, humanity could continue to serve the gods, maintain civilization, and provide the offerings the Anunnaki required. This myth reveals something profound about how the Mesopotamians understood their gods. The Anunnaki were powerful, yes, but they were not omnipotent or always wise. They made mistakes, felt regret, and depended on humanity in ways they didn't always acknowledge. The flood story was a cautionary tale about the consequences of rash action and the interconnected nature of the cosmic order. The Anunnaki in daily life. For the ancient Sumerians, Babylonians, and Assyrians who followed them, the Anunnaki were not just characters in myths, they were active presences in daily life. Every aspect of existence was understood to be under the influence of one or more of these divine beings. Each major city in Mesopotamia had its patron deity from among the Anunnaki. Eridu, considered the oldest city, belonged to Enki. Nippur was Enlil's city. Uruk was associated with both Anu and the goddess Inanna, Ishtar. Ur belonged to the moon god Nana, Sin. These patron deities were believed to literally reside in the city's main temple, which was maintained by priests and priestesses who served as the god's household staff. The temple itself was called the House of the God, and it functioned much like a palace for a divine ruler. The central sanctuary contained a statue of the deity that was treated as if it were the living god. Every morning, temple servants would wake the god by opening the doors to the sanctuary, singing hymns, and presenting fresh clothing. Throughout the day, meals were prepared and offered: bread, beer, meat, and fruit laid before the divine image. In the evening, the god would be put to bed with appropriate rituals. These were not merely symbolic gestures. The Mesopotamians believed that the Anunnaki truly resided in their temples and required these services. The god statue was treated with the same respect and care that would be given to a living king. On festival days, the statue might be taken in procession through the city, or even transported by boat to visit other gods in neighboring cities. Kings and rulers understood their authority as deriving directly from the Anunnaki. A king was not divine himself in most Mesopotamian thinking, but rather was chosen by the gods to rule as their representative on earth. Royal inscriptions regularly describe how Anu and Enlil selected a particular king, granted him power and wisdom, and entrusted him with maintaining order and justice. This divine mandate meant that kings had responsibilities as well as privileges. They were expected to uphold justice, care for widows and orphans, maintain the temples, ensure proper worship of the gods, and expand the influence of their patron deity. Failure in these duties could result in the gods withdrawing their favor, leading to military defeat, natural disasters, or even the end of a dynasty. Common people also interacted with the Anunnaki in more personal ways. Individuals had personal gods, minor deities who served as advocates and protectors. When someone faced injustice or hardship, they would pray to their personal god to intercede with the great Anunnaki on their behalf. This created a kind of divine bureaucracy that mirrored the human bureaucracy of Mesopotamian kingdoms. Illness was often attributed to divine displeasure or demonic attack. Healing required not just medical treatment, but also religious ritual to appease whichever god had been offended. Priests who served as healers would perform divination to determine which deity was causing the problem and what offering or ritual was needed to restore the person to health and divine favor. The Anunnaki also controlled natural phenomena. When storms devastated crops, it was Enlil's anger. When the rivers flooded at the wrong time, Enki had some purpose. When war came, the goddess Ishtar, or the god Nergal, was involved. When harvest was good, the appropriate agricultural deities had blessed the land. Dreams were considered messages from the Anunnaki. Professional dream interpreters would analyze the symbols and scenarios that appeared in sleep, identifying which god had sent the dream and what it portended. Important decisions, from royal campaigns to personal marriages, might be influenced by dream messages from the divine realm. The calendar itself was structured around religious observances, honoring different members of the Anunnaki. Monthly festivals marked key points in the agricultural cycle and astronomical year. The New Year festival, called Akitu, was the most important celebration, lasting 11 days and involving elaborate rituals that symbolically renewed the cosmic order and the king's divine mandate. In this way, the Anunnaki were woven into every thread of Mesopotamian life. They were not distant philosophical concepts, but immediate, present realities that required constant attention, worship, and respect. The relationship between humanity and these gods defined existence itself. The Epic of Gilgamesh and the Anunnaki, one of the most complete surviving windows into Mesopotamian mythology, is the Epic of Gilgamesh, humanity's oldest known epic poem. While Gilgamesh himself was a human king, though claimed to be two-thirds divine, his story brings him into contact with numerous members of the Anunnaki and reveals much about how these gods operated. Gilgamesh was king of Uruk, a city sacred to the sky god Anu and the goddess Ishtar. He was described as supremely powerful, wise, and handsome, but also tyrannical in his youth. He exhausted his own people with constant demands for labor on building projects and claimed the right to sleep with brides before their husbands. The people of Uruk cried out to the gods for relief from their own king's excesses. The Anunnaki heard these prayers and responded by creating a wild man named Enkidu to be Gilgamesh's equal and challenger. The goddess Aruru shaped Enkidu from clay in the wilderness, making him powerful enough to rival the king. After a great wrestling match in which neither could defeat the other, Gilgamesh and Enkidu became the closest of friends. Together, they embarked on adventures that brought them into conflict with divine forces. They traveled to the cedar forest to slay Humbaba, a monster placed there as guardian by Enlil himself. Despite Enkidu's warnings about angering the great god, Gilgamesh insisted on the quest for glory. When they killed Humbaba, Enlil was indeed furious at the disrespect shown to his appointed guardian. Returning to Uruk, Gilgamesh caught the attention of Ishtar, the goddess of love and war. She proposed marriage, offering him gifts and favor. But Gilgamesh, perhaps unwisely, rejected her harshly, recounting the terrible fates of her previous lovers, men and gods who had suffered horribly after earning her affection. Each former lover she had transformed into animals or killed through her divine power. Ishtar, humiliated and enraged, went to her father Anu and demanded revenge. She asked for the bull of heaven, a divine beast of immense destructive power, threatening to break down the gates of the underworld and release the dead if he refused. Anu reluctantly gave her the bull, which descended to earth and wreaked havoc on Uruk and its surroundings. With each snort of its nostrils, the bull opened chasms in the earth that swallowed hundreds of men. But Gilgamesh and Enkidu fought the bull together. Enkidu grabbed it by the horns while Gilgamesh delivered the killing blow. In their triumph, Enkidu compounded their offense by tearing off the bull's haunch and throwing it in Ishtar's face, mocking the goddess. The Anunnaki convened a council to judge these offenses. Gilgamesh and Enkidu had now killed two beings under divine protection, Humbaba and the Bull of Heaven, and had insulted major gods, including Enlil and Ishtar. Punishment was required. The gods decreed that one of the two heroes must die. Shamash, the sun god who had favored their quest, protested that he had encouraged them, but was overruled. Enkidu was chosen for death. In the following days, Enkidu suffered from a divine illness sent by the Anunnaki. Fever burned through him, and he gradually weakened. Before dying, he had dreams of the underworld, the house of dust ruled by Ereshkigal, where even the Anunnaki's power was limited. He described it as a place of no return, where all are equal in death, covered in dust and feathers like birds, where the only food is clay and the only drink is muddy water. Enkidu's death devastated Gilgamesh and sparked his obsessive quest for immortality. He could not accept that even he, part divine, must eventually die. This quest led him to seek out Utnapishtim, the survivor of the Great Flood who had been granted immortality by the Anunnaki. Gilgamesh's journey to find Utnapishtim took him beyond the boundaries of the normal world. He traveled through the mountain passage guarded by scorpion beings, crossed the waters of death, and finally reached the far shore where Utnapishtim dwelt. There, he heard the story of the flood and learned a harsh truth. Immortality was not available to ordinary humans, no matter how great. Utnapishtim's survival and eternal life were unique circumstances, a one-time gift from the Anunnaki that would never be repeated. The epic ends with Gilgamesh returning to Uruk, finally accepting his mortality, but finding solace in the immortality of his works, the great walls of Uruk that would endure long after he was gone. The story reveals the Anunnaki as powerful but not always predictable, capable of both generosity and harsh judgment, and ultimately in control of the boundary between mortal and divine. The underworld and Inanna's descent. The Anunnaki's power extended even into death. The realm of the dead, called Irkalla or Kur, was ruled by the goddess Ereshkigal and populated by a dark assembly of underworld Anunnaki who judge the deceased. One of the most haunting myths involving these underworld Anunnaki concerns the goddess Inanna's descent into this realm of no return. Inanna, known as Ishtar in later periods, was the goddess of love, beauty, war, and political power. She was among the most powerful of the Anunnaki, feared and adored in equal measure. Yet even she was subject to the laws that governed the underworld, her elder sister's domain. The myth, The Descent of Inanna, describes how this great goddess decided to attend the funeral of Gugalana, the bull of heaven, in the underworld. She prepared carefully, adorning herself with all 7 of her divine powers, represented by sacred items she wore: her crown, lapis lazuli necklace, twin egg-shaped beads, breastplate, gold ring, measuring rod and line, and royal robe. Inanna approached the first of 7 gates that led progressively deeper into the underworld. At each gate, she was forced to remove one of her divine powers before being allowed to pass. By the time she reached the throne room of Ereshkigal, Inanna was naked and powerless, stripped of everything that made her mighty. The 7 judges of the underworld, the Anunnaki of Kur, sat in judgment. They fastened their eyes upon her, the eye of death. At their word, Inanna was struck down, killed, and her corpse hung on a hook on the wall. The great goddess had become like any other soul trapped in the land of no return. But Inanna had prepared for this possibility. She had instructed her faithful servant Ninshubur that if she did not return within 3 days, he should go to the temples of the great gods and plead for help. Enki, always clever and compassionate, responded to these pleas. He created 2 genderless beings from the dirt beneath his fingernails and armed them with food and water of life. These beings could enter the underworld without being trapped by its laws because they were neither fully alive nor dead. They found Ereshkigal in the midst of the pains of childbirth. Giving birth is a theme that connects the world above with the world below in Mesopotamian thought. The beings Enki sent sympathized with her pain, and in gratitude, Ereshkigal agreed to release Inanna. But there was a condition. Someone had to take her place. The underworld Anunnaki demanded a substitute. Inanna rose from death and began her journey back through the 7 gates, reclaiming her powers at each level. When she emerged into the world above, she found her husband Dumuzi, who had not mourned her death and instead sat comfortably on a throne. Furious at his indifference, Inanna designated him as her substitute. Demons seized Dumuzi and dragged him down to the underworld. Eventually, a compromise was reached. Dumuzi would spend half the year in the underworld, while his sister, Geshtinanna, would spend the other half. This myth became associated with the seasonal cycle. Dumuzi's descent marking the hot, barren summer months when vegetation died, and his return marking the cool season when the land became green again. The story reveals several important aspects of the Anunnaki's nature. First, their laws were inexorable. Even a great goddess could not simply override the rules of the underworld. Second, death was not the end, but neither was the afterlife a place of reward or punishment based on moral behavior. Instead, it was a grim democracy where all eventually dwelt together in dust and darkness. Third, the boundaries between realms were real and significant, requiring special dispensations or tricks to cross. The Anunnaki of the underworld, the 7 judges who sat in the gloom, were particularly feared because they determined the length of each person's life. Various prayers and rituals were designed to appeal to these judges, asking them to extend the supplicant's time among the living or to spare them from premature death. The Tablet of Destinies. Among the most important artifacts in Anunnaki mythology was the Tablet of Destinies, called the Dup Shemati in Sumerian. This was not merely a symbolic object, but was understood as the actual source and register of cosmic order. Whoever possessed the Tablet of Destinies held supreme authority over all creation, including power over the other Anunnaki. In the proper order of things, this tablet belonged to Enlil, the king of the gods. Its possession legitimized his rule and gave him the ability to decree fates that no one, not even other gods, could overturn. The tablet was kept secure in Enlil's temple in Nippur, guarded and protected as the most valuable object in existence. But according to one myth cycle, a crisis arose when the tablet was stolen. The thief was Anzu, a divine bird monster who served as gatekeeper in Enlil's palace. Anzu came upon Enlil while the god was bathing, noticed the tablet set aside, and seized it. With the tablet in his possession, Anzu fled to the mountains, and his newfound power made him nearly invincible. When the god sent winds against him, Anzu simply used the tablet's power to still the winds. When they sent storms, he calmed them with a word. The theft of the Tablet of Destinies threw the cosmos into chaos. Without its power, Enlil could not properly maintain cosmic order. The other Anunnaki gathered in council, worried and uncertain. Who could possibly challenge Anzu when he wielded the tablet's authority? Any warrior who tried would find his weapons and divine powers rendered useless by the very artifact they were trying to reclaim. Several gods were asked to champion this cause, but each refused, understanding the impossible nature of the task. Finally, the young god Ninurta, patron of hunting and war, accepted the challenge. But he needed a strategy. Force alone would not work. Ninurta approached the battle with both courage and cunning. He was aided by Ea, Enki, who advised him on how to approach Anzu. In the ensuing battle, Ninurta had to find a moment when Anzu was vulnerable, a brief instant when the tablet's power was not actively defending its holder. In some versions of the myth, this came when Ninurta's arrow flew toward Anzu. In that split second, when the bird monster had to focus on defense rather than maintaining his magical shields, Ninurta's arrow struck true, severing Anzu's wing pinions. With Anzu defeated, the Tablet of Destinies was recovered and returned to Enlil. Order was restored to the cosmos, and Ninurta was honored among the Anunnaki for his bravery and success. This myth emphasized several key concepts: that power must be legitimately held, that chaos results when cosmic order is disrupted, and that even in a hierarchical divine system, younger gods could prove themselves and rise in status. The Tablet of Destinies appears in other contexts as well. During the New Year festival in Babylon, there were ritual reenactments of the moment when Marduk, Babylon's patron god, received the Tablet of Destinies from the older generation of gods, symbolizing the transfer of supreme authority to him and, by extension, to Babylon itself. This concept of written destiny was deeply Mesopotamian. They were, after all, the inventors of writing, and they understood the power of the written word. To write something down was to make it real and permanent. The Tablet of Destinies took this principle to its ultimate conclusion. It was the master text of reality itself, and whoever controlled it controlled existence. Evolution of the Anunnaki across cultures. As Mesopotamian civilization evolved and as different peoples conquered and ruled the region, the stories and understanding of the Anunnaki also evolved. The core myths remained, but emphasis, interpretation, and sometimes even the identity of major gods shifted. When the Babylonians rose to prominence under Hammurabi around 1750 BCE, they began elevating their patron god Marduk to supreme status among the Anunnaki. The Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic, tells a story that centers Marduk in ways that earlier Sumerian texts had centered Enlil. In the Enuma Elish, the story begins with the primordial deities, Apsu, fresh water, and Tiamat, salt water, whose mingling produced the first gods. These early gods were so noisy and disruptive that Apsu decided to destroy them. But Ea, Enki, learned of this plan and killed Apsu first. Tiamat, enraged by her consort's death, created an army of monsters to wage war on the younger gods. The younger Anunnaki were terrified of Tiamat's might. None of the established gods would face her until young Marduk volunteered. but only if the other gods would acknowledge him as their permanent king. Desperate, the Anunnaki agreed. They granted Marduk supreme authority and gave him the Tablet of Destinies. Marduk faced Tiamat in cosmic battle. He caught her in a net, drove winds into her mouth when she tried to swallow him, and shot an arrow that split her heart. From Tiamat's corpse, Marduk created the world. Her body became the earth and sky. Her eyes became the sources of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Her tail became the Milky Way. This myth served multiple purposes for the Babylonians. It explained creation, but more importantly, it explained and justified why Marduk, and by extension Babylon, should rule over the other gods and cities. The older Anunnaki had proven inadequate to protect cosmic order, so a new champion was needed. When the Assyrians dominated the region, they performed a similar elevation with their god Ashur, sometimes replacing Marduk's name in texts with Ashur's to justify Assyrian supremacy. The Anunnaki remained, but the emphasis on which God was first among them shifted based on political circumstances. Despite these variations, certain core concepts about the Anunnaki remained consistent across cultures and centuries. They were the gods who maintained cosmic order, who had created humanity for service, who controlled natural forces, who required worship and offerings, and who judged both the living and the dead. The relationship between humanity and these divine beings was understood as fundamental to existence itself. The legacy and modern interpretations. The ancient texts describing the Anunnaki were written in cuneiform script on clay tablets. Many of these tablets survived because clay, when dried or baked, is remarkably durable. Thousands of years after they were created, archaeologists began recovering these tablets from the ruins of Mesopotamian cities in the 19th and 20th centuries. The decipherment of cuneiform in the 1800s opened a window into a lost world. Scholars could suddenly read the actual words of ancient Sumerians, Babylonians, and Assyrians, including their myths, prayers, legal codes, business records, and personal letters. The Anunnaki emerged from these texts as central figures in one of humanity's earliest and most influential religious traditions. The scholarly study of these texts revealed fascinating connections. The flood story in Gilgamesh had obvious parallels to the biblical flood narrative, suggesting shared cultural origins or influences in the ancient Near East. The creation of humanity from clay and divine essence appeared in various forms across different cultures. The concept of a council of gods making decisions about human fate had echoes in other ancient traditions. In the modern era, the Anunnaki have taken on new meanings beyond their historical context. Some fringe theorists have reinterpreted the myths as describing ancient astronauts, extraterrestrial visitors to Earth, who were misunderstood as gods by primitive humans. These interpretations typically focus on phrases like "those who came from heaven to earth" and the Anunnaki's advanced knowledge, claiming these describe technological rather than divine beings. These modern reinterpretations, while popular in certain circles, are not supported by mainstream archaeology, anthropology, or historical linguistics. The cuneiform texts, when read in their full cultural and linguistic context, describe a sophisticated theological and philosophical system, not an encounter with alien beings. The heaven from which the Anunnaki came was understood as a spiritual realm, not outer space. Their knowledge and power were divine attributes, not technology. Nevertheless, the persistence of these alternative theories speaks to the continued fascination with the Anunnaki. There is something compelling about these ancient divine beings who shaped civilization, created humanity, and whose stories were important enough to be preserved on countless tablets. The actual historical significance of the Anunnaki myths cannot be overstated. These stories represent some of the earliest attempts by human civilization to answer fundamental questions. Where did we come from? Why are we here? What is our relationship to the divine? What happens after death? Why does the world contain both order and chaos, justice and injustice?